Well, I'm not going to sing 4T, but over lunch, it was suggested that we should put a jingle together about 4T. So I'm going to talk to my boss, Secretary Wong, and we'll see if we can do that. But before we can sing leadership, what we can do is talk about leadership. Now, this particular panel, we're going to talk about leadership and innovation. You heard all morning about what we should do and what we must do. But how do leaders understand the role that they can play and the role that they can have? So today we have 5 speakers who are going to share the issue of leadership with us from different perspectives. Now, because our first speaker needs to leave after his talk, what I thought we would do is I would invite the first speaker to come and do his presentation first. And then I will introduce the other 4 speakers. So our first speaker is someone well known to Hong Kong, Douglas Wu, who's the chairman and managing director of Wheelock. Now we have a young leader running a very old company. Wheelock is a company that has been in Hong Kong for a very, very long time, a company that we're very familiar with. So Douglas, the stage is yours. Share with us your ideas of leadership, what you can do, what you think of in terms of your company and your sector. Thank you.
Hello. Good afternoon. So thank you very much for the introduction, Christine. And good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. So the topic is sustainable built environment and the leadership there. And to start off with, I think everyone would agree that the Paris Agreement was a pivotal moment. So we're talking about countries coming together and forming a leadership pact. And we know that cities have come together and they're forming this leadership pact as well. So the issue is global and local, and it's a challenge and also an opportunity for all of us. So simply put, it's collective leadership. So what do we think about this? Well, I think that not one organization can do it themselves. Not the government, not an NGO, not an organization, not an individual. It's everyone coming together. And from what I see over the last day and a half, it's about sharing best practices, and cutting down learning curves amongst different parties. And most importantly is working together, engaging, and acting. So as you all know, Hong Kong is a very dense environment with green and blue. And I know that some of you may not live in Hong Kong, so welcome to Hong Kong. And we're very fortunate here. There's been a lot of progress over the last few years as well, which is very optimistic. And also, I think many other cities face the same issues: London, New York, Tokyo, etc. But being in this environment, we actually have a slight edge, all these cities together, because we know the issues at hand and we want to work with it. So coming back to buildings and leadership there. So when we're talking about buildings, what are we talking about? I think I like to simplify things a little bit for my own benefit. It's about how we build them, what we put in them, and how we do it at scale. So, for instance, in terms of building, and how we do this through leadership as well. In construction, it's kind of a win-win situation. The difficulty is in the supply chain, working with different partners and trying to work out constructive solutions. We are very happy here in one of the projects to be able to achieve 100% or close to 100% construction waste recycling. And the leadership behind that, well, the team did that. And it was a concerted effort of the team with our contractor working together to achieve that achievement. So going further ahead, we've set up a construction benchmark and monitoring system so that we can actually take further steps. We're starting off maybe like a few percent per annum, trying to improve our recycling. And again, that is the team's own efforts to do that. Secondly here is office building. Everybody here knows about the life cycle equation. So that's very, very easy for management to support. For instance, a 500,000 square foot building in Hong Kong, it would probably save, through the implementation of technologies, 4 million Hong Kong dollars per annum in energy and water savings alone. The more challenging one is actually on the residential side. There's been very interesting hints of a bit of a shift of change at the moment, but overall, some might say that the driver for a customer to make a buying decision with regards to residential development may not fully be focused on the environmental side. So here, a lot of developers in Hong Kong are following benchmarks, Hong Kong Beam, LEED, WELL programs, and these are very helpful. But on the other hand, I think that it's about the technology ecosystem within any city, within any system. So what I mean by that is that we all want to be able to facilitate more attractive, more efficient, and more effective, more efficient, and more attractive products into the market. So how do we do this, and who's in the system? This is the suppliers, the distributors, government agencies, regulators, developers, buyers, users, everyone. And after our lunch, I feel as though there's a concerted effort to try and bring some dialogue, because this is not only within an organization, this is cross organizations. So that dialogue, that collaboration is very critical for that. Finally, another side which is very important is actually how you use one's buildings. This is low carbon office. We like to start small and test things out and go for the low-hanging fruits. About 7, 8 years ago, we started with this, printing on both sides of paper, saving this and that, and it really helped a lot. But what really catapulted us was joining a LOOP program, which is a low-carbon office program. It provided us with the system, the discipline, and the formality behind tracking and monitoring and seeing what we're doing, what the results are. And we couldn't do that from where we started. We had to rely on a third party to bring that in, and that was helpful. So quickly, I'd like to go through like 2 examples, a little bit more concrete, of things that we have done that hopefully have some small impact. The first one is really simple. Turn the lights off. So, just on the numbers basis, if someone's office is open 9 to 6, that's 9-hour working day. You turn the lights out at lunch, and you make sure the lights go on only at 9 and go off at 6. You probably get a saving of 1 to 2 hours a day. On a 9-hour workday, that's 10% on the general sort of office environment. That's considerable. Secondly is plastics in office. This came from the team as well. And basically the idea is that in Hong Kong we find in every office desk there's a bin. And inside the bin there's the rubbish bag, and inside of that there's the trash. So what we sort of implemented was that, you just have paper only. Take away the rubbish bin. The benefits are actually quite fun. First of all, you have a clean office environment. The liquids and the food waste go into the pantry. The tissue paper of your sick friend next to you goes into the pantry, so you have more of a germ-free environment. You have a sorting process built in here, and finally, you have a more sociable environment in the pantry. So just to close up very quickly, is that in our organization, I'm very fortunate. There's a lot of energy and a lot of positivity towards this initiative, green and other ideas. And actually, a lot of it is actually coming from the ground up. I chair the CSR committee on the group level, and hopefully that helps. But in the end of the day, I'm reliant on the ideas that come through. So again, it's a shared responsibility. And any feedback, any ideas coming forward, please pass them over. We're all ears. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, we'll say goodbye to Douglas. Thank you so much for taking time to come. I know you have an urgent meeting that you need to go to. We always just talk about how expensive property is in Hong Kong. So it's good sometimes to listen to the property developers on the commercial side to see actually what they're doing. We have the opportunity also in government to look at what government is doing, and I know how hard it is to actually link everything up together. Now, our next speaker is Dr. George Baird, the Emeritus Professor of Building Sciences from Victoria University of Wellington. George is an expert in this area. He's one of the leading scholars who can help us to frame the idea of leadership. So George, please.
Thank you, Christine, for that introduction. As it happens, yesterday's roundtable gave me, I think, the perfect introduction to what I want to speak about today, because 3 of the 4 speakers referred directly to people. People in buildings, not buildings and then people, but people first. Phrases like buildings are for humans, better places for people, healthier and happier occupants. These are phrases that all came up yesterday, and they were music to my ears, because what I want to speak about is why we should be assessing building performance from the point of view of the users. In other words, the user first. We can, I won't digress yet, that'll come later. From the point of view of the users, and more importantly today, how it can be done as well. And there's 2 key questions I'd like to pose to you all, really. And I don't expect a poll of answers or anything like that at this stage. But the key questions are, why don't we, or why do we rarely assess building performance from the point of view of the users and occupiers? Well, why don't we do it? It's a lot easier than assessing energy use or measuring temperatures for months on end and all these other things. And second question, why don't we do it routinely as part of what we do as designers and building owners and organizations, if you like? Because going to the first question, the economic case, well, you all know the 100 to 10 to 1 equation. That's simply that 100 is the salaried costs, 10 is the cost of operating the building, and 1 is the cost of energy. And you know the effort we put into assessing energy use. And I've done plenty of it as well, so I know what's involved, especially if the monitoring device doesn't work and all the rest of it. Anyway. It's surely obvious we should be asking the salary earners how they perceive the building, how they think it affects their health and happiness, as well as their productivity, of course. I know there are obstacles, and maybe we'll get onto some of that in the discussion afterwards. But for the moment, my suggestion is just do it. Just do it. And after all, the users are our ultimate client. And I'm sure that's written into most of your professional ethics statements. It's the people you're designed for as well as your client. And you have to do well or do correctly by them. So why don't we measure do these measurements and come up with benchmarks and that kind of thing. The tools are available. There are questionnaires. It's very simple. A questionnaire is a lot easier than what goes into doing instrumental measurements. I'm not saying you don't have to do that, but it's a lot easier, relatively speaking. There's at least 2 well-established questionnaire systems, one by Building Use Studies in the UK, and the other by the Centre for the Built Environment. These are ones that have been established, they've been operating for many, many years, they've built up databases and so on. The Building Use Studies one was designed as a paper-based exercise, and the graph on the right, which is probably a bit too small to see, but that's just showing an incredible correlation between, on the vertical scale, people's perception of thermal comfort, on the horizontal scale, their perception of how they think it's affecting their productivity. And there's a correlation coefficient there which you can only dream of I think it's 0.8 something or other. The other one, the building is, sorry, the center for the Berkeley one was designed as a web-based exercise, and they've pursued that one. And if you're going to use these surveys, how do you come up with a benchmark for it? You can just simply base it on the scores. These questionnaires tend to have 5-point, 7-point, 9-point scales, that kind of other. So you can either decide you're going to have an absolute scale. All your buildings have to score a 7, or a 4, or an average, or whatever you like. Or you can do it relative to other buildings in your portfolio. That's a simple way to do it. But either way, these can work very easily. And we've discovered recently that you can probably base them on comments, people's comments as well. The little graph there shows a scale, and the question along the bottom is design. And 1 represents you didn't like it, 7 you think it's perfect from your point of view. The actual question was, all things considered, how do you rate the building design? And the histogram represents, as you can see, most people giving it a 6, quite a number giving it a 7, quite a number giving it a 5, quite a number giving it a 4, which is in the middle, and not very many. So we shouldn't be scared to ask people what they think of the building. They'll give you a sensible answer. And you might be wondering what the green and the red stuff is at the top of the scale. I'll tell you first of all that the questions, this particular question, people were asked to make a comment as well, if they wanted. Well, only about 1/3 of the people made a comment. The gray stuff is all the people, is the great silent majority who were quite happy to tick the box and say, yeah, there you go. The green ones are people who gave a positive comment as well, and the red ones are people who gave, could call a negative comment. The blue bit in between is is a balanced comment, if you like. And you can see, even with a score of 6, there were still people giving what you might interpret as negative comments, but it's not a problem. People are very perceptive. They'll tell you something that isn't working, but overall, they'll give you a score. Of course, at the bottom end, it goes the other way. Anyway, enough of that. I've got a whole lecture on that in session 5.12 tomorrow, if you want to come along. My challenge to the industry in general, and to the many green building councils, is this: to show leadership by putting performance from the point of view of the user top of the agenda. And I was absolutely delighted yesterday at the equivalent session to hear the chair of the World Green Building Council stating his aim of a healthier and happier occupants. And I challenge you all to follow suit. If the last speakers will have an advert, so am I. Thank you very much.
Thank you, George. Please come and take a seat. So we'll invite our next speaker, Professor Greg Foliante, Enterprise Professor from the University of Melbourne, Regional Director in Asia Pacific of WSBE, and the Founding Director of NBlue Pty Limited.
Discussions yesterday morning and this morning in the plenary, and our wonderful speakers have told us about the grand vision and ambition we should have in the built environment. And the question is, what is the leadership required to achieve that ambition? And how can we do that? If I turn the question back to you and ask every one of you the same question, show me or tell me the kind of leadership required, and you give me an answer each, we will have 1,000 answers. And each one of them is valid. And the first point that I like to make is that it's all about context and vision. We may have a collective vision that we all agree on, but our specific context, we can have specific vision and goals. And we will have different contexts and therefore different solutions. and different leadership styles. One size does not fit all. First comment. I'll give you two examples. The first example is the leadership required to bring the Paris Agreement to bear, the leadership required to bring the Global Alliance for Building and Construction formed in Paris. But it's a different kind of leadership a year or two later, right? So what happened last week required a different type of leadership, and the context already changed. And therefore, we need to respond to this changing context. And I tweeted, because hours after the announcement in the US, there was another famous personality, Mike Bloomberg, who tweeted right away, Americans are not walking away from the Paris Agreement, just the opposite. We are forging ahead. And I tweeted back what true climate and societal leadership looks like. Things change, and our leadership adapts to it. And that consortium, that alliance, if you're reading, has more than 80 mayors in the US alone, more than 9 governors, and all the top industries and biggest companies in the world. Things change. Second example, I'd like to introduce you to John Hardy from Bali, Indonesia. If you've never heard of John Hardy, I wanted to invite him when I organized the World Sustainable Building Conference in 2008 in Melbourne to close the conference. Why? Because he's the greatest example in my book of a true, holistic, deep green lifestyle. John Hardy is a Canadian jewel designer who moved to Bali a long time ago and married an American and established John Hardy Jewelry. And he was featured in Time magazine as a pioneer in sustainable luxury. I got to know him from there, and I visited him before 2008. At that time, he sold the business because he had this holistic way of treating the community in Bali, holistically, environmentally, socially, and many others that are very, very interesting. Then I found out about his house. His house was made of recycled materials, and then I found out that he was starting an ecotourism where everything was recycled, and I stayed in this place as his guest. And it was wonderful. Everything is organic, the food, the swimming pool, and he was starting Green School Bali. And he talked in TED Talk about Green School Bali. And he started Green Village. And he had Ibuku Bali. And he has all kinds of social and environmental causes. Deep lifestyle change in context of tropical living in Bali. In context and deep. The second point is we have to go for bold tipping point options. And tipping point is the word I use for transformative, innovative leadership. So we have this transformation of a butterfly in this conference. And if we have a sustainability potential goal, right, and that's the desired state in time F, according to Christiana in 2020, but it can be 2030, 2040, 2050. We would aim for that, right? And this is what normal incremental innovation would look like, successful, and we'll meet that. But failure is an option. Yeah? We may fail. But the second type of failure is that it may be too little, too late. Little innovation may not be sufficient, as we heard this morning. Right? What we need are tipping point innovation, transformational innovation, exponential innovation, the things we talked about, not incremental, because the difference between T at that time period may be the crunch. It may be the difference between survival and failure. So that's the kind of vision we have and we need. Incremental may not just do it. And we heard that. The third point, everyone has a role. So I like the 40s in Hong Kong. Last T, number 4, is togetherness. And everyone has a role. I like to then give you a context. I told you that there may be 1,000 examples. And I take the context for decision making that was proposed by Dave Snowden, a Welsh. He was the IBM Chief Knowledge Management Officer who developed a Connevin framework with apologies to the Welsh people here in the audience. Cynefin is a Welsh word. There's a very good YouTube to describe this, but I will tell you my short version for this purpose. This is the Cynefin framework. It has an ordered system on your right, ordered situation, this unordered situation on the left. And depending on your situation, this is a decision-making framework. For decision contexts that are simple, the action and leadership required is to sense. And if we can sense and categorize for the simplest and obvious types of cases of cause and effect, a very well-known cause and effect, then we sense, we categorize, and we respond. And because it's our based on simple cases, we do our best practice. But if we are in a complicated domain, the cause and effect is known, but there are many pathways to the effect. So therefore, the response and type of leadership required is sense, analyze, and respond. And because there are many possible solutions, we need to have experts to analyze the situation to choose the right approach for that particular problem. So we need good practice, not best practice. Best practice is required only if it's a very simple cause and effect relationship. And if the causation is not clear or difficult, we are in the complex domain where there are many decision makers, there are many moving parts, and the cause and effect is not very clear, and there's feedback and relationship and coupling between cause and effect. Then the idea is to identify the directions we want the impact to be, know the indicators that tell you where to go, probe, simple experiments, simple actions, find out which direction the indicators are going, sense, and you amplify if it's going the right direction, or you dampen, you change course if it's going the wrong direction. And you do this and you maximize the opportunity in this complex environment, which is mostly what we have. The final thing is the description over chaotic. So in a chaotic environment, things are out of order. Therefore, the first thing to do is to act to put them in order. Sense where it is going, and then respond, whether the response is complicated or complex. Now, the relationship usually is to work on the top in the complex and complicated for this transformative innovation. Tipping point innovations require massive moving parts moving in the same direction to give you that kind of highly powerful transformative type of change. But there is also a way to go to chaotic. If you pass through the chaotic from complex deliberately, you can have some innovation. But if you follow from it, from the obvious, from the simple, you fall from obvious to chaotic in a crisis. And sometimes that's what happens. We get a crisis, and you have to stop the crisis, and you act by force. By necessity, we act. And sometimes that's where transformative change happens as well. And so in summary, it's all about context. We may agree on the broad vision, it's all about context because no one size fits all. We should go for bold, innovative, tipping point, transformative work, not incremental, will not do, and everyone has a role. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you. You know, Greg, as Greg was speaking, I keep thinking I want him as my personal coach. It's about context, it's about thinking where we are, and he's asking us, each one of us, to do more within our context. So we'll talk more about that. Well, we have two more speakers. I'd like to invite Mr. Tan Tian Chong, the Deputy Managing Director, Built Environment Research and Innovation Institute, Building and Construction Authority from Singapore.
Now, I'm a Singaporean. I follow rules. The organizers say I have only 5 slides and 5 minutes. And I'm supposed to share with you how the government of Singapore drove and led the green building movement over the last 12 years. 12 years in 5 minutes. Now, it all started in 2005, January 2005, when BCA launched the Green Mark, Singapore's green building rating system. Now, in the first year, we managed to certify only 17 buildings. In the second year, no better, still 17 buildings. So we decided BCA need to lead and drive the green building agenda in Singapore. So for the next 8 to 9 years, we implemented 3 green building master plans. The first focused on greening new buildings. Now in 2008, we set a national target to green at least 80% of all our buildings by 2030. Got 2 T's. 2030. Now this means that we have to green as many existing buildings as possible. And this is certainly more challenging than greening new ones. So in 2009, in our second green building master plan, we focused a lot on greening existing buildings. Now, by 2013, we have greened over 2,000 building projects. That was quite good. But we also found by then that green buildings are not really green until the occupants are also green. Now, this is because we found that for most non-residential buildings, the occupants and the plug loads account for 50%, sometimes even more, of the total energy consumed. And George is right. You need to put the occupants at the center of green buildings. So the third green building master plan, and going forward, we're going to pay more attention to the users. Now, in this master plans, we have quite a few key initiatives that help us to drive the green building agenda. I will just highlight 5 of them which are more impactful. First of all, we got the public sector to take the lead. In Singapore, the public sector is the biggest developer and also the biggest building owner. So all new government buildings must be platinum standard. And all existing buildings with central aircon system, they must be retrofitted to Gold Plus standard by the year 2020. Now this is important because these efforts actually create a lead demand for green building technologies and energy efficiency solutions, which help to make them very competitive. Now, next, incentives. I think this is a favorite subject of developers and building owners in the audience. Now, in Singapore, we started off with monetary incentive for developers who achieve platinum or Gold Plus for their new buildings. Now, we even extend the monetary incentive to architects and engineers, who develop these projects. But the money soon ran out. It was only 20 million, small change. And happily, this was replaced by the very attractive bonus GFA. I think the developers in the audience are very familiar with this. And it's still going on, and of course, it has really helped to push the development of high platinum and Gold Plus rated buildings in Singapore. Now, we also have subsidies for building owners of existing buildings. Now, I'm going to make things difficult for Christine. We set aside 150 million Singapore dollars to help building owners to retrofit their existing buildings to become greener and more energy efficient. And in fact, subsequently, the subsidies was also extended to tenants of buildings, so for their green fit-outs. Now, if incentives is not enough, we legislate. Singapore is not shy to legislate. From April 2008, all new buildings that are more than 2,000 square meters had to be Green Mark certified. And this legislation was extended to existing buildings. What we did was, when you retrofit your aircon system, you have to comply with the minimum energy efficiency standard set by the BCA. Now, the same legislation also required the energy system to undergo 3 yearly energy audit. This is to ensure the system sustain its energy efficiency throughout its life cycle. Now, at the same time, we also require all building owners to submit yearly energy performance report to BCA together with relevant building data. This allows BCA to keep track of the energy performance of every building in Singapore. Now, next, research and innovation. Over the last 10 years, we set aside more than $100 million for research and innovation in order to promote the use of advanced technologies in our buildings. And we believe technology development will push the actual performance of our buildings. And finally, capability building. I think this is one area which is, the importance is usually underestimated. Now, if we want Green Mark to be mainstream for all our buildings and city building, we need to ensure that all the building practitioners must be competent in green building design, construction, and operation. So the BC Academy has set a target to train more than 20,000 what we call green collar specialists by the year 2020. Now, another important thing we did in 2008 was to help set up the Singapore Green Building Council. We supported it by providing seed money and secretariat support for 3 years. Now, today, the Singapore Green Building Council takes the lead to certify green building products and accredit green building services. And of course, this complements very well the Green Mark scheme in Singapore. Now, the various master planners also help to groom industry leaders among the private sector. For instance, in 2015 and 2016, our 3 top developers, CapitaLand, and City Developments, were ranked among the top global 100 most sustainable corporations in the world. I think we are very proud of this. Only 4 Singapore companies made it to top 100, and 3 of them are real estate developers. And the results of all these efforts, you can see by the end of financial year 16, we have greened over 3,000 building projects. And this is almost 90 million square meters of floor area, which is about 33% of our total building stock. And I think we are on target to hit the 80% by 2030. And finally, going forward, we want to focus on technology development and research and information. I think as mentioned this morning by Christiana, we should look for exponential improvement. And I think John also mentioned we should look at net zero energy building and push energy efficiency to its limits. And that is what we're going to do. In fact, our ambition in the future is to have positive energy, low-rise buildings, zero energy, medium-rise building, and super low energy, high-rise buildings. I think if we can do that, then our green buildings will perform exponentially well. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much. That's always great competition for Hong Kong. You've done a tremendous job. I think everybody recognizes that. Our last speaker of the day is Mr. Lincoln Leung, the CEO of our greatly beloved Hong Kong company, the MTR.
Thank you, Christine. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We all see Singapore and Hong Kong really as partners and not competitors. What I'd like to do this afternoon, very briefly, in my 5 minutes, is talk about sustainable urbanization and how the MTR business model contributes to sustainable urbanization. Two key aspects of urbanization and sustainable urbanization. One, transportation. The second, housing. We believe that the business model we have here at MTR, a model that we've used for 40 years, allows for that sustainable urbanization. It's a business model that helps develop the rail transportation, a critical element in urbanization, as well as housing the people moving into those cities, what we call our rail and property model. As a result of that, every day here in Hong Kong, 90% of our commuters take public transportation. Many of you that may come from North America or Australia, the equivalent number would be 15%. It may be 20%. In Hong Kong, it's 90. Of that 90%, half of them, 48.5 of the 90%, take rail as that mode of public transportation. As you know, rail an environmentally friendly mode of public transportation. One of our trains is the equivalent of 25 buses. This model, however, also allows for the significant development of accommodation and housing. This model, which combines rail development with the property development above and adjacent to our stations, to our depots, had allowed for development over 43 of our stations. We've built over 13 million square meters of residential accommodation together with our development partners. That's over 100,000 housing units. It allows for that type of density of residential housing. Importantly, this model allows for financial sustainability. As an example, every year we at MTR, we spend the equivalent of about $1 billion. That's $1 billion in upgrading, maintaining, and servicing our assets, both our rail assets and our property-related assets. If we don't have the financial resources, we would not be able to replace the chillers, our HVAC systems that would save 30% of our HVAC electricity usage. It would not allow us to put technology into our rail system to allow for the further savings in terms of energy usage. This sustainable business model, which really comes from the Hong Kong government 40 years ago, means that we can sustain the development of our public metro system here with virtually no subsidy from the government. And you would say, well, that's easy, but your fares would be expensive. Actually, no. Our average fares in Hong Kong is $1 on average across our network. That's the average fares that people pay to use the system. So therefore, with this sustainable financial model, it allows us not only to have an affordable fare structure, but at the same time, plow in significant resources to keep upgrading as well as enhancing the network to provide for environmental friendliness. But importantly, this rail and property model allows for communities and the development of significant and large communities around rail stations. Generally, we treat a radius of around 500 meters as a reasonable walking distance to our various stations. What we do is enhance the density in that radius of 500 meters. So therefore, you have around stations, high development density. You have land use diversity. It's not just residential. It's not just shopping centers. It's not just offices. It's a combination of all of those, plus open space, parks, etc., that allows for that diversity of use. It also allows for scheme design. It allows for the implementation of scheme design over a large development complex. By the way, all our developments that we're working with developers on are now to BEAM Plus Gold standard. Give you an example, and a live example right now of one of these developments. Lois Park is a community which is in the eastern part of Hong Kong. 32 hectares. It will ultimately be 1.6 million square meters of residential as well as retail space. There's a park in that development as well. 50 residential towers. It will also have a 500,000 square feet shopping center. Mixed use allows for convenience of the users, convenience of people living in that development. Ultimately, there'll be 68,000 people living in that development. So, to summarize, what we have in our rail and property model, our rail and community model, is one, it allows for the development of a sustainable rail infrastructure as well as significant property development without the use of much public financial resources. That equivalent public financial resources could be put to other uses, be that in education or healthcare. It is people-oriented, as one of our previous speakers have noted. Look at it from the user's perspective. How can we make this whole system, this whole ecosystem, more user-friendly? From transportation to everyday living to going back home and having dinner, sleeping in their apartments. How can we make that whole cycle more user-friendly for all our users? Safety and health are critical components of this model as well. For example, in our developments, we segregate pedestrians from the road networks, enhancing safety for commuters as well as for people who live in those developments. And lastly, because of this ability to put density around these stations, it allows for a more modern and a more efficient city and better town planning for the whole community at large. So with that, Christine, thank you very much.
Well, gentlemen, if I may, I picked up one particular issue I'm very interested in, and I think it cuts across what everybody has said. You know, we talked about the people, the occupants, the people who live and work in buildings, and you've all said in different ways that they need to be engaged, they need to be a part of this. And Lincoln, you're like a mayor of a small town and many other places with just in one of your developments, 68,000 people. I mean, that is tremendous, and that's only one of his developments. So in all your experience, what are effective ways to really engage the occupants? I mean, I know you do, the MTR, you do a lot of surveys. I mean, you do a lot of surveys for people who ride the MTR. What do you do with the people who are living in buildings, and perhaps also from Singapore? And then, you know, we can think a little bit about how this is being tracked by the academic sector. Perhaps Lincoln and Mr. Tan, you can go first.
Well, from an MTR perspective, it starts right at the beginning with planning. It's planning that community, that maximization of the flexibility of space, how we encompass both residential, open parkland, retail activities in one development that allows for ease and convenience of usage. So it starts with the planning aspect, and then it goes into the actual development aspect. And that development aspect, as I mentioned, for all our developments, we are working with our developers to a BEAM plus Gold standard. And that really enhances the whole environment. In that particular...
I mean, but do people who live in your buildings know they're living in a terrific Gold standard building?
I think they may not recognize it as such, but I think they appreciate some of the items that are put in there. For instance, you would have taps that would save water. For instance, we have grey water recycling in Lois Park. They may not recognize the fact that they are in a beam plus gold. But I think when they are living there, they appreciate the facilities and the amenities that are provided.
But what about in Singapore? Do they know they're living in high standard green buildings?
I mentioned just now that we need to focus attention on the occupants. And now we retrofitted many buildings, especially aircon systems. And at the end of the exercise, almost every building, the aircon system improved by 35 to 40%. But when we look at the overall improvement of the energy consumption, it was only 15 to 20%, which means that the occupants portion, nothing happened. And we found out that the occupants are really not really interested in energy efficiency improvements. They are more concerned with their well-being, the comfort, the thermal comfort, how conducive an environment. So we need to change our approach, and I think George mentioned that. Ask the users what they want. Another example, I had these very exciting projects. I talk about positive energy, low-rise buildings. Now, we have 369 schools in Singapore, mostly low-rise, and mostly not fully air-conditioned. And we have a program to put solar panels on the roof of all these schools, and I can turn all these schools into positive energy schools or zero energy schools. But I went to the Ministry of Education. I couldn't understand why they were not that excited. And then I found out, we are concerned with climate change. We are concerned with the increase in temperature. And we are worried, what's this going to do to our students? What's going to happen to their thermal comfort? Will it affect the performance? Can you do something about it? So that was our opportunity. So in this program to green the schools, besides the energy efficiency improvement, besides putting solar panels, we decide to pay a lot more attention to the comfort of the students. So we are doing research to see how the environment can be improved, even without, or especially without air conditioning. Natural ventilation, look at the noise pollution problems. So I think the first thing to do is find out what the users want and what is close to their heart.
You're taking a different approach, right? But perhaps I can ask, because we only have 6 minutes left, so I want to ask George and then ask Greg, the two professors, now that you've heard from two amazing developers that the hundreds of thousands of people who live in their buildings don't kind of really appreciate it, but they are living in great buildings and you've designed everything for them, what would you recommend that they do? How can we get the occupants really excited and appreciate the environment that they're living in? George and then Greg.
Well, I don't know if you'll be able to get them excited, but what will get the occupants excited is if they can live their lives better, if it's an office building, if they can do their work more efficiently without having the hassles of having to ring somebody up every time there's a problem, or having the chore of basically having to call up some call center, which often ends up, and then the message gets lost. The people who are in the buildings are the experts on the buildings. We may well be great at designing great heating and ventilating systems or great architecture and so on, but if you live in a building for a month or two or a year or two, you soon get to know its foibles, the things that work, the things that don't work, and it's time our designers asked them to find out what these things are and incorporate them in their new designs. We seem to be terrified to ask these things for fear of the blame game. There'll be some lawyer will come and destroy your business because you didn't get something right. I think we have to get into our heads that we can't design buildings that are going to be perfect from day one. Even the ASHRAE standards for thermal comfort allow 10% of the population to be uncomfortable. know they have to do something about it themselves, so it shouldn't come as a surprise to us. We've seen approaches in the UK called soft landings, where you're allowed to adjust the building for a year or so after it's occupied, and perhaps come back to it as well. There's too much fear, if you like, of all the terrible things that will happen. But I've certainly found that people are very astute. As I said in the presentation, they can score some aspect of the building and still give you some snippet of useful information about it, which you can use to improve your next design.
Right. Well, you know, I'm fascinating to hear that sometimes property managers and owners are fearful of asking occupants how they really think and feel. Greg, what advice do you have for us?
Well, true to the concept or the underlying message in my talk, the answer is it depends. Context matters, right? That's the idea. So I would take the old Chinese proverb, 1 step backward, 2 steps forward. And what it means is that the step backward is to understand the underlying value set. Because people have different value set. Different people, different stakeholders. It's not just the users, but it's the developers, it's the regulators, it's the planners. That's why I say everyone. And every stakeholder has a different value set, a different role. So not one size fits all. And so therefore, what drives planner type A will be different to what will drive planner type B. And it's the same thing with users and occupants and so on. So we need to understand first where they're coming from. Sometimes it's not going to change the value set, so we have to find other means. So if it's about economics that drives some groups of people, then we have to prove the economics of it. If it's about quality of life and well-being, then we have to show them the benefits of that. If it's something else, if it's about environmental burden, and so on and so forth. So it's putting the right diagnosis on what is the barrier for individual groups of people and giving the appropriate way to change over time that pattern, because we cannot have a one-size-fits-all. But in the end, over time, we need to go deep, like John Hardy, across all aspects of our lifestyle. We need to go wide, which is this togetherness and working together. And in the end, we just need to go for it in terms of the things that are transformative, because it's not possible otherwise.
We have 1 minute, 45 seconds. So I'm just thinking the 2 developers who are running really tremendous properties, any ideas or observations that you could take away that might give you that greater ambition, that new context that you can take home and see whether you can do something better or something different that you're not doing yet? Lincoln?
For us, it gets back to the points that, very good points that everyone's made, which is really looking at it from the user's perspective, from the user's lens. And it may be different perspective from different users. So moving away from a developer's lens, moving away from a transport operator's lens, but looking at it from a user's perspective and the integration for that user of all the services to enhance the quality of life for that user.
Well, I wouldn't say it's new perspective, but I think after 2 days here, it's affirmed our conviction that we should go for exponential improvement in our technology, research, and innovation, so that we can really achieve a significant improvement in the battle against climate change.
Well, I think what we can do for the rest of this conference is really to think about what is that level of ambition that we can each achieve. So we can think in more personal terms, we can think in organizational terms, in terms of the organization we're with. You can also give us some ideas in government. What is the suitable level of ambition that we should have? Maybe not overall, because that might be too difficult, but at least in the area of the built environment. So if you have any great ideas for us, please send us messages. And please join me now to thank the very excellent panel.